Hey viewers! Hope you're all doing great. Before I start the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. The air hums faintly beneath the stones. You cannot hear it, not really. But if you stop long enough on a quiet street somewhere in London, or Lyon or Cologne, something beneath your shoes feels older than the world you know. There is a rhythm there, a kind of forgotten pulse. Beneath the asphalt, under layers of soil and concrete, the veins of an ancient empire still wind their way through Europe. The Roman roads, straight, deliberate, stubborn, never truly died. They are simply sleeping, and Europe has grown over them like a second skin. It begins in silence, long before the hum of engines or the sound of footsteps on cobblestone. Imagine a line of soldiers in the 1st century BCE, cutting through forests and marshlands. They move with precision, surveying instruments in hand, following the command to build a road that will last forever. The Romans didn't just travel. They conquered geography itself. They measured the land, plotted it, tamed it. From the chalk downs of Britain to the alpine passes of Switzerland, they drew straight lines where nature curved. They called it Via Munita, the fortified road. The first great network began under the Republic, but it was the empire that turned roads into arteries of power. The Via Appia, the queen of roads, stretched from Rome to Brindisi, the southern port that opened paths to Greece and the east. It was built in 312 BCE by Appius Claudius Caecus, paved with heavy basalt stones that still glisten in the rain today. Travelers would have seen mile markers carved with distances to the capital, and the remains of tombs along the road, each one whispering stories of families who wanted eternity to remember them beside Rome's most famous path. As you walk through modern Europe, the traces are everywhere, but invisible unless you know how to look. Beneath Paris, the Roman Cardo and Decumanus still shape the streets. In London, the A2 and A5 follow the exact lines of the Roman Watling Street. Archaeologists have unearthed fragments of gravel, stones blackened with age, the faint trace of wheel ruts left by carts that rolled 2,000 years ago. In Cologne, beneath the shopping arcades and glass-fronted cafes, a Roman street still lies preserved, complete with drainage channels and flagstones smoothed by centuries of use. To the Romans, roads were not mere conveniences. They were military instruments, paths for legions to march, supplies to move, messages to fly across provinces. But over time, they became something more. Channels through which cultures, languages, and goods flowed. The same road that carried soldiers might later carry pilgrims, merchants, or thieves. And when the empire fell, the roads endured, even when no one remembered their names. Archaeologists still debate the total length of the Roman road system. Some say 400,000 kilometers. Others closer to 500,000. About 80,000 of those were stone-paved. The precision was astonishing. Surveyors used the groma, a cross-shaped tool, to align their roads with mathematical exactness. They built in layers. A foundation of large stones, a middle layer of gravel and crushed rock, and a top surface of carefully fitted paving slabs. Beneath all that, they ensured drainage with ditches on either side. These weren't simple dirt tracks. They were feats of engineering so advanced that even modern roads sometimes follow their blueprints. One of the strangest truths is how much of modern Europe still stands on these Roman bones. Highways, railways, even entire cities have inherited their skeleton. In France, the D-road system, departmental routes, often overlaps with Roman viae. The old Via Domitia, which once connected Italy to Spain, now runs beneath stretches of the A9 autoroute. In Britain, the M1 follows the same corridor once taken by the Roman Ermine Street. In Germany, the Autobahn between Mainz and Cologne mirrors the Roman Via Agrippa. The modern world rolls over Rome without realizing it. Sometimes the past resurfaces unexpectedly. In 2018, during construction work in the English city of Gloucester, workers uncovered a perfectly preserved Roman road. Stone slabs intact, drainage intact, even wheel grooves visible. In Italy, Archaeologists in the ancient port city of Ostia found a road still lined with shops, taverns, and warehouses, as though the merchants had just stepped away. In the Netherlands, a Roman road unearthed near Nijmegen was found to have been built with a mix of river clay and gravel, specially chosen to resist flooding. Proof that Roman engineers understood local materials better than most who came after them. But the strangest discoveries are the ones that lie directly beneath where millions walk today. Beneath the Piazza Venezia in Rome, under the traffic and honking cars, archaeologists have mapped the ancient Via Flaminia. In Istanbul, under the crowded lanes of the Grand Bazaar, lies the continuation of the Via Egnatia, the road that once carried legions to Byzantium. In Barcelona, fragments of the Cardo Maximus still shape the Gothic quarter, invisible but unforgotten. Each road carries not just stones but memories. The sound of sandals striking the dust, the creak of wagons, the scent of olive oil and wine being carried from one end of the empire to the other. Along these routes, messengers galloped with imperial decrees sealed in wax. Merchants hauled amphorae filled with grain. Travelers prayed at roadside shrines. The roads were the empire's nervous system, its communication network, centuries before the telegraph or the internet. And then, as the centuries passed, the hum began to fade. Grass grew over the edges. Bridges crumbled. Empires fell. And new kingdoms rose on the same ground. But something curious happened. Europe never truly forgot those lines. Even in the Middle Ages, when maps were rough and roads few, the same paths reappeared, reused by pilgrims heading to Santiago, by traders traveling between markets, by armies marching toward new wars. Beneath every modern capital, beneath every crossroads, the ghost of Rome still lingers. You might not believe it, but many of these ancient roads remain so well built that modern archaeologists have to dig several meters deep to reach their foundations. In some cases, when cities expand underground, for subways or parking structures, the builders encounter those roads, lying in silence, waiting. The stones are slick with centuries of moisture, but their structure remains intact, untouched by time. There's one moment that often startles archaeologists, when the first slab of Roman stone emerges from the soil and the light touches it again after 2,000 years. It's like finding a heartbeat in the earth, a line of memory refusing to fade. And sometimes it's not just the stones they find. Sometimes, buried beside those roads, they find coins, dropped by a traveler hurrying to Rome, never knowing that his steps would still echo in the present. Something strange happens when you realize that every city you know, every road you drive, stands atop another world. A buried map of empire lies beneath your feet. In the hush of night, when the traffic fades and only the low murmur of a distant city remains, the ground beneath seems to remember. Every layer of stone tells a story. Some whisper of legions marching under the banner of the eagle, others of merchants carrying silk and spices across the empire's spine. Beneath the glass towers of Frankfurt, beneath the cathedrals of Lyon, beneath the cobbled alleys of York, the Roman grid still lies unbroken. 2,000 years ago, the empire pulsed through these lines. The Romans had understood something extraordinary, that to rule the land, one must connect it. Their roads were not built at random. They were instruments of control, designed to hold an empire of more than 60 million souls together. The roads radiated outward from the capital like the spokes of a wheel. At the center stood Rome, the heart that never stopped beating. Every milestone counted its distance from that point, as if every corner of the known world must remember its place in relation to the eternal city. Take, for instance, the Via Appia. Travelers moving south from Rome would leave the city through the Porta Capena and descend into the low, open countryside. They would pass tombs carved with Latin inscriptions, mausoleums shaped like towers, the silent markers of those who wanted their memory bound forever to the empire's most sacred road. The path was lined with cypress trees, and the air would carry the smell of pine and dust. The basalt stones, dark and uneven, would shimmer under the Mediterranean sun. It was along this very road that armies once marched toward the east, and where later the bodies of 6,000 slaves were crucified after Spartacus's failed rebellion, their deaths left as a warning to all who defied Rome. The Romans were pragmatic, but they were also dreamers of stone. They built for permanence. Their engineers, called agrimensors, used methods so advanced that modern surveyors still marvel at them. They aligned their roads by sighting distant landmarks, mountains, or even the stars. When terrain resisted them, they cut through hills or built embankments. When they reached rivers, they built bridges of such strength that some, like the Pont du Gard in southern France, still stand today. The durability was deliberate. They wanted to create paths that would not just cross space, but defy time. Many of the great roads were built by the legions themselves. Soldiers became masons, surveyors, and laborers. They dug deep foundations, poured in crushed stone, then layered gravel, sand, and slabs until the surface lay smooth and hard. Every 20 Roman miles they built mutations, stations for changing horses, and mansions where travelers could rest. These were the resting lungs of the empire, where information flowed, soldiers regrouped, and messages changed hands. Over these roads, the Roman courier system, the cursus publicus, carried imperial correspondence. Couriers could travel up to 120 kilometers a day, changing horses at each stop. Letters from Rome could reach Britain or Syria in mere weeks. The roads were Rome's telegraph, its network of veins and nerves. Without them, the empire's vast reach would have dissolved into silence. In time, these same roads carried more than armies and orders. They became the pathways of civilization itself. Along them spread Roman law, architecture, and language. The Latin tongue flowed through Europe like water following a channel, leaving behind new dialects that would one day become French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. Even religion moved along these roads. The first Christian missionaries, traveling under threat and secrecy, walked these same routes, carrying with them ideas that would eventually reshape the empire itself. But time changes everything, even stone. When the empire began to fracture in the 4th and 5th centuries, the maintenance of roads faltered. Without the legions to repair them, cracks appeared. Weeds grew. Floods washed away bridges. And yet, many roads endured. So perfectly aligned, so well constructed, that medieval travelers later rediscovered them without even knowing whose hands had made them. In the heart of France, the old Roman Via Agrippa became a pilgrim route leading to the shrine of Saint Martin of Tours. In Spain, the Via Augusta merged into the Camino Real, guiding traders and wanderers centuries after the empire's fall. In Britain, Roman roads like Fosse Way and Ermine Street became the skeleton of the early English road system. Even today, in parts of rural England, locals refer to long, straight country lanes simply as the Roman road, though the empire has been gone for 1500 years. The mystery lies not only in what we can see, but what remains hidden. Beneath layers of soil, entire networks remain untouched. In 2019, LiDAR scanning, a technology that maps the ground using laser light, revealed hundreds of kilometers of Roman roads in northern Europe, invisible to the naked eye. One such road was found beneath a modern highway in the Netherlands, another beneath farmland in Wales, perfectly aligned with known Roman forts. The data showed that even when human memory fades, the geometry of Rome remains inscribed in the earth. There are places where the ancient and modern worlds intersect so closely that they almost merge. In Rome itself, modern cars drive over paving stones first laid in the time of Augustus. In the English town of St. Albans, buses rumble along the same line once trodden by legionaries bound for Londinium. In Cologne, Germany, the subway tunnels cut through layers of Roman roads so precisely that archaeologists had to pause construction to record them before they disappeared forever. What fascinates historians most is not merely the engineering, but the psychology behind it. The Romans saw roads as instruments of destiny. To them, a road was a declaration, a way of saying we were here and we will be remembered. Wherever their legions went, they left this mark. And though the marble of their cities has crumbled, though their emperors have turned to dust, the roads remain, quiet, resilient, waiting. There's a strange comfort in that. Beneath all the noise of the present, beneath the concrete and traffic, the bones of the past are still there, holding the shape of the world. They remind us that civilization, no matter how fragile, always leaves traces that refuse to vanish. And sometimes at dawn, when the mist lifts over a forgotten valley in Italy or a field in Britain, a faint straight line cuts across the landscape. Too deliberate to be natural, too perfect to be chance. It's a whisper from another time, a reminder that Rome is never as far away as we think. The morning light creeps slowly across an uneven field in southern Britain. To the untrained eye, there is nothing remarkable about it. A quiet stretch of land, divided by hedgerows and the traces of tractor wheels. But when the air is still, and the dew catches the light, a faint line reveals itself. A long, narrow ridge runs straight as an arrow through the landscape, cutting across the curves of rivers and the folds of hills. Archaeologists know it instantly. It is not a natural rise. It is a Roman road, still holding its course after nearly 2 millennia. That precision is what sets the Roman network apart from every other in history. Most ancient paths followed the land, winding with valleys, curving around obstacles. The Romans refused to. Their roads defied geography. They climbed mountains, sliced through forests, bridged marshes, and forded rivers, all to maintain the shortest possible route between 2 points. The ideal was always straightness, the shortest line between 2 destinations, both a symbol and a statement. To stand on one of these roads and look ahead was to see order imposed upon chaos. Nowhere was this discipline more evident than in Gaul, the vast province that now encompasses France and parts of Belgium and Germany. There, the great road system built by Marcus Agrippa in the 1st century BCE became a masterpiece of imperial planning. From the city of Lugdunum, modern Lyon, 4 major roads radiated outward like the arms of a cross. One led north toward the Rhine, another west toward the Atlantic, a third south toward the Mediterranean, and a fourth east toward the Alps. From these main arteries, smaller routes spread across the countryside, linking garrisons, settlements, and trade centers. To this day, the road map of France still reflects Agrippa's pattern, like a ghost echoing through time. It's remarkable how much of Europe's landscape was physically shaped by these roads. Towns sprang up along them, thriving on the constant movement of people and goods. Inns and taverns appeared, serving weary travelers. Markets formed near junctions. Shrines were built where routes met, honoring the spirits believed to guard travelers. Even language absorbed their presence. The Latin word via became voie in French, via in Italian, via in Spanish, way in English. The roads themselves entered Europe's vocabulary, as if the land and its people could never forget what Rome had laid down. One of the most haunting survivals lies in northern Italy, near Verona. There, parts of the Via Postumia still exist exactly as they did in the days of the Republic. Wide slabs of limestone fit together in an almost seamless pattern. On some sections, the grooves carved by iron-bound wagon wheels are still visible, faint, shallow lines etched into the stone by centuries of travel. Standing on that ancient surface, one can almost hear the sound of hooves striking against it, the low rumble of carts, the calls of soldiers speaking in Latin accents now lost to time. The roads connected not just cities but ideas. They carried art, technology, and philosophy. A mosaic discovered in a villa near Pompeii shows a trader leading camels loaded with spices, goods brought across half the known world, along the roads that linked Rome to the east. From the ports of Ostia and Brindisi, caravans moved inland, following the Via Appia and Via Flaminia, distributing silk, ivory, and glassware throughout the provinces. The wealth of Rome's markets depended entirely on the reliability of its roads. Without them, even the empire's great grain supply from Egypt would have rotted before reaching the hungry cities. And yet, for all their power, the roads were also fragile. They required constant repair. Every year, thousands of laborers, often slaves or local peasants, were pressed into maintaining them. Bridges had to be strengthened after floods, drainage channels cleared, pavement slabs replaced where frost had cracked them. Inscriptions found along several roads record the names of magistrates who supervised such work, proud of the duty that kept the empire moving. For the Romans, road maintenance was a moral duty as much as a civic one. Neglecting it was a sign of decline. When the empire's unity began to crumble in the 4th and 5th centuries, so too did the network that held it together. In the provinces, tax revenues dried up, armies deserted, and maintenance ceased. Grass began to grow between the stones. Bridges collapsed into rivers. Caravans dwindled. And yet, even as the Western Empire fell, the Eastern Roman world, Byzantium, continued to preserve and repair its ancient routes, understanding that control of the road meant control of the empire itself. One of the most enduring examples of this continuity is the Via Egnatia, stretching from the Adriatic coast of modern Albania across Macedonia to Byzantium, now Istanbul. For over 1,500 years, this road remained in use. It carried Roman legions, Byzantine traders, and later Ottoman armies. Its stones are still visible today, buried beneath fields and mountain passes, linking modern Albania, Greece, and Turkey in a line of history so clear that satellites can still trace it from space. In Britain, the pattern repeated itself in quieter ways. After the Roman withdrawal in the early 5th century, new kingdoms rose, Saxons, Angles, and Celts, but they kept to the old Roman routes. Even when the Latin language vanished, the roads endured, renamed but not forgotten. Ermine Street, Watling Street, Fosse Way. All once Latin names reshaped by local tongues. When medieval travelers spoke of taking the old way, they meant the Roman one. Monks on pilgrimage, knights on crusade, merchants heading for fairs. All of them followed paths first laid by legionaries. The physical presence of the roads survived even when the memory of Rome had turned into legend. Today, when archaeologists map these routes, they often find themselves tracing the same lines that modern roads already follow. Engineers who designed Europe's highways in the 20th century were often unaware that they were replicating Roman routes. The A1 motorway in England mirrors the ancient course of Ermine Street. The N7 in France echoes the Via Agrippa. The SS7 in Italy still bears the name Via Appia Nuova, the new Appian Way. Even the autobahns of Germany occasionally overlap with Roman foundations, the result of geography that has not changed since antiquity. But beneath the asphalt, the original stones sometimes still lie waiting. During construction in the French city of Nîmes, workers discovered a Roman road beneath a modern intersection, its flagstones laid in perfect symmetry, its drainage intact, untouched since the fall of the empire. The sensation among archaeologists was electric. A living artery of history, revealed for a brief moment, then covered again to protect it from the weight of the modern world. The past does not vanish. It hides, quietly, beneath the rhythm of our feet, beneath the hum of our cars. The roads are there, unseen but enduring, the skeleton of an empire that once bound a continent together. In the heart of Europe, beneath cities where no one speaks Latin anymore, the stones of Rome still breathe quietly in the dark. Workers dig foundations for a new subway in Vienna or Madrid, and suddenly their shovels strike a surface that sounds different. Solid, deliberate. When the dust clears, they find what the Romans called via strata, the layered road. The stones are large, fitted tightly together like pieces of a puzzle, and even after 2,000 years, the joins remain so perfect that not even a blade of grass has forced its way between them. That kind of endurance was no accident. Roman engineers built roads not for a season, but for eternity. They followed a strict method, one that even now astonishes modern builders. First came the fossa, a deep trench cut through the earth. Into it went the statumen, a bed of large, flat stones for stability. Above that came the rudis, a mixture of gravel and lime. Then the nucleus, a layer of compacted sand and crushed stone. Finally, the summum dorsum, the paved surface itself, made of heavy polygonal blocks of basalt or limestone. On either side, they dug ditches for drainage and built curbs to hold the edges. The slight upward curve in the middle, the camber, allowed rain to run off smoothly. Every element served purpose and permanence. In some ways, the Roman road was as much a symbol of Rome's mind as of its power. It represented order, geometry, and will, the belief that through human design, nature could be shaped and civilization maintained. Even the smallest outpost of the empire was connected to the capital by this invisible logic. Every road, no matter how remote, eventually led to Rome. It was not just a statement of geography. but of faith in empire itself. Walk through the ruins of Pompeii, and you can still see the ruts worn into the stone by carts. The grooves run parallel, never straying from their line. At the crossroads, raised stepping stones allow pedestrians to cross while water from the gutters runs between them. This was urban design centuries ahead of its time. Drainage, traffic management, and pedestrian safety all considered in the same plan. The road was not only a way to move, it was a living part of the city, connecting homes, shops, and temples in a rhythm of daily life. Far beyond Italy, that same pattern unfolded. In North Africa, roads cut through deserts, linking Carthage to Tripoli and Alexandria. In the Balkans, they climbed steep valleys to connect remote mountain forts. In Spain, the Via Augusta followed the Mediterranean coast from the Pyrenees to Cadiz, its milestones still visible today beside olive groves and vineyards. Some of those stones still bear the carved initials MP Caesar, Imperator Caesar, like signatures left by history itself. Milestones were the empire's memory markers. Placed every 1,000 paces, they recorded not just distance but authority. Each bore the name of the emperor under whose reign the road was maintained. When travelers read those names, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, they were reminded that the empire was everywhere, watching, maintaining, enduring. The road was propaganda in stone. As the centuries passed, nature slowly began to reclaim what man had built. Earth settled into cracks. Plants took root between paving stones. Floods buried sections under layers of silt. Yet even in neglect, the roads retained their purpose. In the Middle Ages, travelers followed them instinctively, as if guided by some ancient memory of direction. The lines were too perfect to ignore. Monks on pilgrimage from Canterbury to Rome found themselves tracing old Roman routes without knowing it. Merchants riding from Flanders to Venice unknowingly rode over stones placed by legionary engineers 1,000 years before. Some of the most evocative rediscoveries have come from beneath modern cities. In Paris, archaeologists excavating near the Seine uncovered a Roman road lined with fragments of pottery and the bones of pack animals. The layers of history above it, medieval, Renaissance, modern, had not erased its presence. In Cologne, deep beneath the city hall, the remains of a Roman street still lie preserved, complete with its drainage and stone curbs. In London, construction workers laying foundations for a modern office building in the city district found a stretch of the ancient road that once led to the Roman fort at Londinium. The stones were still stained with traces of iron and charcoal, remnants of blacksmiths and traders who had once worked beside it. There's a quiet fascination in how these discoveries appear. Often, the roads lie just meters below the surface, so close that every day, thousands walk above them unaware. Beneath supermarkets, car parks, and apartment blocks, the straight lines of Rome remain. In some places they still guide the pattern of streets. The grid of old Roman towns often survives in modern layouts. The Cardo and Decumanus, the north-south and east-west axes, shaping city centers from Florence to Cologne to Barcelona. It is in these alignments that Rome's invisible hand can still be felt. The straightness of a boulevard, the curve of a bridge, the alignment of city squares, all trace back to principles laid out by surveyors in togas 2 millennia ago. What looks like coincidence is often inheritance. And though the surface has changed, cobblestones replaced by asphalt, horses by cars, legions by commuters, the rhythm beneath remains the same. The hum of traffic today echoes the rumble of Roman wagons. The flow of people between cities mirrors the flow that once carried soldiers and merchants. Europe, in its essence, still moves along Roman lines. In recent years, modern technology has given historians new ways to trace these buried arteries. Satellite imagery and LiDAR scanning reveal the ghosts of roads beneath forests, fields, and urban sprawl. In 2020, a series of scans across southern Germany identified nearly 200 kilometers of Roman roadways hidden beneath farmland, each one perfectly aligned with known Roman settlements. The clarity was uncanny, as though the roads were simply sleeping under a thin blanket of time. These discoveries remind us that history is not distant. It's layered, folded quietly beneath our every step. Every modern highway, every narrow cobbled street, every footpath that cuts too straight across a hill, all might be part of a pattern older than any nation. The Roman roads are not gone. They are only buried, waiting for us to notice the lines again. The empire that built them is long dead, its emperors forgotten, its banners crumbled to dust. But its paths endure, holding their course through the centuries, guiding us even when we no longer remember why. Beneath us they still whisper in stone, the sound of purpose, the echo of order in a restless world. Across the wide plains of Europe, time has softened the outlines of empire, but the straight roads of Rome refuse to vanish. They run beneath vineyards and through forests, under the foundations of churches and factories, each one a scar of history beneath the surface. To follow their paths is to trace the veins of a civilization that once believed it could make the world eternal. In the south of France, near the Rhône Valley, the ghost of the Via Domitia still appears after heavy rain. Farmers say that when the soil is wet, a dark, hard line emerges across their fields, a buried strip of stones laid in the age of Augustus. That road once carried Roman armies from Italy into Gaul and Spain, crossing bridges and mountain passes built with impossible precision. The road linked Narbonne to Nîmes and beyond to the Pyrenees, forming part of the great western artery of the empire. In modern France, highways still follow its course, each one a descendant of that ancient route, proof that the geometry of power remains even when the empire is gone. It was along roads like these that Europe first learned to move as one body. Messages, laws, and taxes flowed from the heart of Rome outward like blood from a heart. Along the way came not just officials and soldiers, but language, architecture, and custom. A farmer in Gaul built his villa with the same mosaic floors seen in Campania. A merchant in Britain used amphorae stamped with marks from Spain. An innkeeper in Germany served wine brought from Italy. The roads were more than stone. They were the threads that wove the Roman world into a single fabric. The efficiency of this network astonished even later civilizations. Medieval chroniclers often described the Roman roads as if they had been made by supernatural forces, because no one in their age could imagine building something so precise. In Britain, some local legends called them Devil's Causeways, believing that no human hands could have cut such straight lines through the landscape. In truth, it was not magic but mathematics. The Romans combined geometry, surveying instruments, and relentless labor to create perfection in stone. One of the great wonders of this system was the Tabula Peutingeriana, a long parchment map that depicted the Roman world as a web of routes. It stretched from Britain to India, not drawn to geographic scale, but to show the connections, the roads, cities, and stopping stations that held the empire together. It was, in a sense, the world's first travel map. Scholars believe it may have been used by imperial couriers or administrators to estimate distances and plan journeys. Looking at it now, one sees a vision of order, an empire conceived as a network, held by roads like strands of silk. The Romans themselves measured the empire not in miles of conquest, but in miles of road. The phrase omnes viae Romam ducent, all roads lead to Rome, was not just poetry, it was geography. At the heart of the city, in the Forum, stood the Miliarium Aureum, the golden milestone, set up by Augustus around 20 BCE. All distances in the empire were measured from this point. On it were inscribed the names of the great cities connected to Rome: Byzantium, Alexandria, Carthage, Londinium. It was a physical declaration that every corner of the known world belonged to a single order. As the centuries passed, however, that order began to tremble. The empire grew too large, too heavy for its own roads to sustain. Armies that once marched outward now retreated along the same routes, bringing refugees and fear instead of triumph. In the 3rd century, invasions from the north swept across Gaul and Italy, burning towns that had once thrived along the great highways. Roads that had carried prosperity now carried ruin. Yet even in collapse, the empire's roads refused to die. They were too deeply rooted, too well built to vanish with a generation's fall. In the ashes of empire, new powers rose. The Franks, the Goths, and later the Carolingians all reused the Roman roads, following them as if guided by invisible hands. Charlemagne's empire revived parts of the old network to connect Aachen, his capital, with Italy and the Pyrenees. Monks, missionaries, and merchants continued to travel along those same lines, now calling them the Strata Romana, the Roman streets. From this word came strata in Italian, Strasse in German, street in English. The very vocabulary of movement descended from the empire that had first given Europe its paths. When the Renaissance rediscovered the texts of antiquity, scholars began to study the old roads again. Maps were drawn, and explorers set out to find the lost routes. In 1622, an Italian scholar named Cloverius published one of the first systematic studies of Roman roads, tracing their remains across Europe. By the 18th century, antiquarians in Britain were digging up milestones, measuring the old alignments, and marking them on early maps. Some of those milestones still stand by modern highways, their Latin inscriptions barely legible but unmistakable, numbers that once measured the distance to Rome. In modern archaeology, the rediscovery continues. Each excavation peels back a layer of time, revealing more of the empire's buried grid. In 2014, near the German town of Trier, a Roman road was found beneath a vineyard, its basalt paving still intact, the marks of wagon wheels clearly visible. In 2021, engineers building a railway in Kent, England, uncovered a perfectly preserved section of Roman road, complete with gravel shoulders and the remains of a bridge. Even in decay, the workmanship endures. It's strange to think that the empire's greatest legacy is not its temples or its palaces, but its roads. Temples crumble, marble statues fall, and languages change, but the lines of movement remain. Roads define how people live and where they settle. The Romans understood that whoever controls the road, controls the world. And so, long after the empire's fall, Rome's roads still define the shape of Europe. To drive from Paris to Lyon, from Cologne to Milan, from London to Dover, is to travel paths chosen 2,000 years ago. Beneath your tires lie the stones of soldiers and merchants, the same lines that carried emperors and slaves alike. The world above has changed beyond recognition, but the world below has not. The roads of Rome lie there still, silent, precise, enduring. Their edges are worn, their milestones buried, but their alignment remains unbroken. They are the empire's last breath, a whisper beneath the noise of modern life, reminding us that even when power fades, the traces of order remain. In the deep countryside of northern Spain, near Leon, shepherds still walk trails that once carried the legions of Rome. These trails, called calzadas romanas, twist through oak forests and along rocky slopes, their stones smooth from centuries of hooves and boots. Some farmers, unaware of their ancient origins, still drive their herds across them. Yet the layers of history beneath their feet tell of the empire that once ruled these lands with discipline and vision. When the Romans first reached Hispania, they faced a rugged terrain that defied easy passage. Mountains cut the land into regions, rivers raged in spring floods, and the heat of summer baked the soil into stone. But the engineers of Rome were patient. They surveyed, cut, and leveled. They built bridges of stone and arches of lime mortar that still stand after 2,000 years. Roads like the Via de la Plata, the Silver Way, connected the mines of the north with the ports of the south, carrying silver, copper, and gold to the ships that would feed the empire's hunger for wealth. Along these roads rose mansions, roadside stations maintained by the Roman state. Each stood about 20 to 30 kilometers apart, the distance a horse could travel in a day. Couriers on the imperial post, known as the cursus publicus, could change horses at each station, carrying messages across the empire faster than any other civilization in the ancient world. From Britain to Syria, this system linked governors to emperors, cities to provinces, and soldiers to their supply lines. It was the nervous system of the empire, invisible to most, but essential to its survival. Even today, archaeologists find traces of these stations. Fragments of stables, inscriptions, and broken pottery where travelers once rested. In some parts of Europe, entire villages grew around these ancient stops. Their names still betray their origins. Stretton in England, for instance, means settlement on a Roman street. In Italy, towns like Stradella, Viareggio, and Pavia all grew beside the Vai, each name echoing the same forgotten origin, the road that made them. But Rome's roads were not merely utilitarian. They were expressions of imperial will. Every mile of stone declared that the land had been measured, conquered, and made part of a single order. To build a road was to claim the earth beneath it. And so, when rebellious tribes or rival powers rose against Rome, the first act of imperial restoration was always the same: rebuild the road. Soldiers could follow it, merchants could revive trade, and order would flow again. In the east, the great road from Byzantium to Antioch carried not only troops but pilgrims, scholars, and traders. It connected Europe to Asia, the Aegean to the deserts of Syria. Caravanserais later rose along its course in the Byzantine and Islamic eras, but beneath their foundations, the stones of Rome remained. The same path that bore the legions of Trajan later carried the crusaders of Christendom. In time, even that road faded beneath sand and ruin, yet its alignment still shapes the routes of highways in modern Turkey and Syria. Further north, the roads of Britannia were among the empire's greatest achievements in remote terrain. When Julius Caesar first landed on the island, he found only mud tracks and forests. A century later, the Romans had transformed Britain into a network of order. The Watling Street, Fosse Way, and Ermine Street formed the island's skeleton, running from the Kentish coast through London to the northern frontier. The famous Hadrian's Wall itself was tied into this network, with a military road running its full length. Archaeologists still walk it today, finding the worn ruts of chariot wheels in the stone. But perhaps the most haunting of all these relics lies in Italy itself. The Via Appia Antica, the Queen of Roads. Built in 312 BCE, it stretched from Rome to Brindisi, the gateway to Greece. Its surface of basalt stones is still intact in many places, black and hard as glass, polished by the feet of centuries. Along its sides stand tombs and monuments, the eternal markers of those who wanted to rest beside the road that led to eternity. Even now, to walk the Appian Way is to walk through the soul of empire. The air is quiet, heavy with the scent of cypress, the stones glowing with the warmth of history. Scholars studying the Via Appia have discovered that its construction was not a single act but a living project. Over the centuries, it was repaired, widened, and extended. Each emperor left his mark upon it, not by words, but by stone. It became a palimpsest of power, a record of how Rome maintained control through infrastructure, not ideology. When we look at Europe's modern road network, we see echoes of this Roman grid everywhere. The A1 in Britain follows the line of the old Ermine Street. The Italian SS7 follows the Via Appia. France's N7 shadows the Via Agrippa. Even the highways of Germany mirror the alignments first drawn by Roman surveyors. The empire is gone, but its geometry endures. Some historians argue that the roads were Rome's greatest weapon. Armies could move with unimaginable speed, 30 miles a day, carrying siege engines and supplies. Revolts were crushed before they could spread. Information traveled faster than rumor. The roads allowed an empire of vast diversity, from the icy moors of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt, to function as a single body. When the roads decayed, the empire's coherence vanished. But the roads did more than bind politics. They bound culture. Through them, Latin spread into the dialects that would become Spanish, French, and Italian. Roman law, architecture, and religion traveled the same paths. When Christianity began to spread, it used these very roads. The apostles walked upon them, carrying a message that would outlive the empire that built the way. Paul of Tarsus himself traveled from city to city on Roman highways, his letters following the same routes as imperial decrees once had. Thus, even in decline, the roads carried new life. They were arteries that refused to die, continuing to pulse long after the heart of Rome had stopped beating. By the Middle Ages, many of them lay buried or broken, yet their lines still shaped the geography of Europe's rebirth. Medieval pilgrimage routes to Santiago, Canterbury, and Rome all followed ancient roads. Traders carrying wool, salt, and spices used the same alignments that once bore legions and chariots. Every empire leaves ruins. Rome left roads. And even now, beneath the hum of engines and the rush of modern travel, those ancient stones lie silent, enduring witnesses to an age that believed roads could hold eternity. Beneath the crowded streets of Paris, engineers occasionally strike upon a layer of compacted stone that should not be there. A hard, straight line of gravel and lime running beneath the medieval foundations. It is not part of Haussmann's 19th century design, nor a forgotten wall of the Revolution. It is older, much older. A fragment of Lutetia's Roman road system, built when Paris was still a modest Gallic settlement by the Seine. Archaeologists who have studied these remains describe how Roman engineers raised embankments to lift the road above the floodplain, layering crushed stones, sand, and lime in a sequence so durable that it still resists the drills of modern construction. In Germany, too, the past is hidden just below the surface. Near Cologne, the Via Agrippa once connected the city to Lyon, part of a vast network designed by Marcus Agrippa, friend and general to Augustus. The Germans call some of these alignments Römerstrasse, the Roman street. Motorways now follow their exact paths. The modern driver, unaware, traces the same route that Roman merchants once took, their wagons loaded with amphorae of wine, glassware, and bronze lamps. Every few miles, way stations offered food, repairs, and fresh horses. Travelers paid tolls, perhaps complained of potholes, perhaps whispered gossip about emperors and wars far away. The Roman road system was more than a marvel of engineering. It was a manifestation of state control. Each mile was measured with precision using the groma and chorobates, tools that allowed Roman surveyors to create astonishingly straight alignments across valleys and hills. The milestones, or miliaria, bore inscriptions stating who had built or repaired that section, and under which emperor. To walk along one of these stones was to walk in the shadow of imperial authority. In France, the Via Domitia remains perhaps the best preserved. Built around 118 BCE, it linked Italy with Spain through the passes of the Alps and Pyrenees. Parts of it still surface in southern villages where old Roman bridges carry modern cars. The Pont Julian near Banyuls, its arches unbroken since Augustus's reign, still crosses the river Calivan. Travelers who stop there sometimes notice the wheel ruts etched into the stone, faint but unmistakable, the ghostly traces of wagons that rolled 2 millennia ago. Further south in North Africa, the Roman roads cut through deserts and plains, binding the provinces of Africa Proconsularis, Numidia, and Mauritania. These roads served not only commerce but also the defense of the empire's grain supply. From the olive groves of Tunisia to the sands of Libya, they connected the great estates that fed Rome. The remains of the Via Traiana Nova still stretch through Jordan, once linking Bostra to the Red Sea. There, stones carved with Latin letters still mark the distance to forgotten towns. Bedouin shepherds, crossing the same tracks today, follow paths so ancient they predate their own languages. The genius of Rome lay in its uniformity. Every road followed a method. A deep foundation of stones called statumen, a middle layer of crushed gravel known as rudis, and a top surface of polygonal blocks called summum dorsum. Ditches ran along the sides for drainage, and curbstones defined the edges. The roads were crowned in the center to let rainwater run off, and bridges or culverts ensured no flood could wash them away. They were not just paths, they were machines built to last forever. Even now, satellite imagery reveals their presence. Straight lines that cut across irregular farmland or forest often trace the ghost of a Roman route. Archaeologists use LiDAR scans to map them, uncovering roads invisible to the naked eye but still embedded in the landscape's geometry. In Britain, such studies have found hundreds of miles of roads once thought lost, connecting forts and towns that no ancient text recorded. The invisible empire, it seems, still lies beneath us. It is strange to imagine how daily life unfolded along those ancient highways. Picture a merchant traveling from Nîmes to Alès, his cart heavy with amphorae of olive oil. The sound of wheels over stone echoes in the morning air. Along the roadside, tombs stand like silent witnesses, their Latin inscriptions faded but legible, names of soldiers, freedmen, merchants, and children. Occasionally, a traveler would stop to pour a libation, or to place a coin upon a grave. The road was a thread between the living and the dead, between the Rome that conquered and the Rome that remembered. In rainy weather, the surface of the basalt stones would glisten, turning the road into a ribbon of black glass. Soldiers, wrapped in cloaks, would march in silence, their hobnailed sandals striking sparks as they walked. To march on a Roman road was to feel the order of the world beneath your feet, the sense that every step had purpose, every mile a meaning. When the Western Empire fell, the roads did not vanish overnight. The Ostrogoths, the Franks, and the Visigoths all used them. But without imperial maintenance, the ditches clogged, the stones shifted, and grass grew over the ruts. Medieval chroniclers sometimes mistook the roads for the work of giants or lost kings. Peasants avoided them, fearing bandits or spirits. Yet the roads never truly died. They only slept, waiting beneath the soil for the return of those who would rediscover them. By the Renaissance, scholars began to notice them again. In Italy, antiquarians like Flavio Biondo mapped the ancient routes, recognizing that the old Roman grid had shaped the modern land. In England, the historian William Stukeley traced the course of Ermine Street and Watling Street, sketching their paths across the countryside. These rediscoveries brought awe, a sense that beneath every village lay the bones of empire. In modern times, the rediscovery continues. Construction projects in France, Spain, and Germany routinely uncover Roman paving stones, sometimes several meters beneath modern asphalt. Workers pause, and archaeologists arrive with brushes and cameras. What they find is often astonishing. Roads so well built that only the upper layer is damaged. In some cases, water still drains along the original ditches. It is as if the road itself refuses to yield to time. In the city of Rome, 2 new layers are always being revealed. Near the baths of Caracalla, excavations in recent years uncovered an ancient intersection where 4 roads met, paved in basalt and bordered by sidewalks of travertine. Wheel ruts still mark the lanes, the imprint of carts that passed when Caesar's name was still fresh on men's lips. The sound of the past lingers there. The creak of wooden axles, the clatter of iron wheels, the murmur of traders speaking languages from all corners of the empire. The road remembers them all. Through these discoveries, historians are beginning to understand the true magnitude of Rome's achievement. It was not only that they built 400,000 kilometers of roads across 3 continents, but that they imposed a single vision of connectivity on a fragmented world. For centuries, that vision guided armies, trade, and ideas. And even now, in the digital age, the same logic governs our maps, our routes, our ways of moving. We are, in some quiet way, still walking Rome's roads. Beneath the cobblestones of London's Southwark district, workers widening a railway tunnel in the late 19th century unearthed something unexpected. A smooth stretch of compacted gravel, bordered by large stones and packed with crushed tile. Archaeologists identified it as a section of the Roman Watling Street, the ancient highway that once ran from Dover through London to Wroxeter. The discovery sent ripples of fascination through the scholarly community. For the first time, they could see how deep the Roman foundations lay. Several meters below the modern city, preserved by centuries of gradual accumulation. London, or Londinium as the Romans called it, had been a trading outpost long before it became a capital. The Romans chose the site for its bridge over the Thames, where their engineers built a timber crossing and a road that connected the ports of Kent to the frontier forts of the north. Merchants carrying wine from Gaul and pottery from Spain passed along these roads, their ships docking at wharves that have since disappeared beneath office towers and glass. Even now, when new foundations are dug, workers sometimes find shards of amphorae or coins from the time of Hadrian, silent reminders that beneath London's modern pulse, the old empire still hums faintly. Roman roads were always more than simple routes from one place to another. They were instruments of transformation. When a road entered a landscape, it changed the land itself. Towns appeared along its edges. Fields were reorganized, boundaries redrawn. Roads were magnets for settlement. People followed the promise of movement, of trade, of connection. Along the Fosse Way in Britain, Entire communities grew from what were once temporary Roman camps. Archaeological digs reveal layers of habitation: Roman tiles, followed by Saxon pottery, then medieval masonry. The road itself became a line of continuity through centuries of change. In southern France, the same phenomenon can be seen along the Via Aurelia. Originally built to connect Rome with Gaul's coastal provinces, the road later became the lifeline of medieval trade. Monks, pilgrims, and knights walked where legions once marched. Modern highways like the Aurelian Way still follow its ancient course, a living thread of human movement that has endured for over 2,000 years. But there is a haunting quality to these roads, especially when you realize how deliberately they were aligned. Roman engineers were not content with the easiest path. They sought the most direct one. Hills were cut, valleys filled, rivers spanned. To achieve perfect straightness was an act of will, a physical expression of Roman discipline and ambition. You can stand on the remains of the Via Flaminia, north of Rome, and see its line continue unbroken for miles, vanishing into cypress groves and reappearing beyond the horizon. The effect is mesmerizing, as though the road itself carries purpose, drawn not by men but by fate. In parts of Eastern Europe, these old alignments have guided armies for centuries. Napoleon's troops marched along Roman roads on their way to Italy. The Wehrmacht used the same routes during the Second World War. Even the iron tracks of railways and the steel veins of highways often repeat the choices first made by Roman surveyors 2 millennia ago. It is as though the landscape itself was once mapped by Rome and never truly forgot. Yet for all their grandeur, Roman roads also held an everyday rhythm. Along them moved not just emperors and legions but farmers, pilgrims, slaves, traders, and families seeking better lives. Inns offered bread and wine, stables provided water for horses, and markets sprang up near junctions. Each road was a living ecosystem of motion, a place of meetings and departures, of weariness and hope. Roman poets wrote of the loneliness of the road, of the dust that clung to travelers and the longing for home that haunted them at every milestone. Milestones themselves were marvels of communication. Each was carved with the name of the emperor and the distance from Rome. They told travelers not only where they were but who ruled them. It was a subtle reminder that the empire's reach was both physical and psychological. The traveler never forgot that he walked under Rome's gaze. Some milestones still stand today, their inscriptions weathered but legible. One near Tarragona in Spain reads simply, Imp Caesar DVF Augustus Pontifex Maximus. The stone has stood there since the year 10 BCE, untouched by time except for the soft erosion of wind and rain. In the countryside of Portugal, the Via Romana 18 still winds through cork forests and valleys. Shepherds follow it with their flocks, unaware that the path beneath their boots once bore soldiers bound for distant campaigns. When the sun sets, the road glows faintly gold, the ancient quartz stones catching the fading light. Locals say that on quiet nights, when the wind dies and the earth seems to hold its breath, you can hear faint echoes, the sound of iron-shod hooves striking stone, the murmur of Latin voices carried on the breeze. To modern historians, these sensations are more than folklore. The roads record sound and motion in their very design. Excavations have revealed layers of repair, each one marked by a different technique, the work of generations maintaining the same line. Some roads show up to 7 distinct rebuilds, each separated by decades. It tells us that the empire did not neglect its arteries. It sustained them with constant care. Maintenance crews, known as curators viarum, oversaw teams of slaves and laborers who repaired damage, cleared ditches, and replaced stones. Their inscriptions sometimes survive, proudly naming those who kept the road alive. The longest surviving section of Roman road lies not in Italy but in Syria. The Via Nova Traiana, built under Emperor Trajan, stretches from Bosra to Aqaba, nearly 500 kilometers through desert and mountain. Much of it is still visible from the air, an unbroken scar of stone winding through emptiness. Once, caravans laden with incense, spices, and silk passed along this route, linking Arabia with the Mediterranean world. Traders from Nabatea, Palmyra, and Egypt met here, their languages blending into a chorus of commerce. When the Roman legions withdrew, the caravans kept coming. The road had become part of the desert's own memory. In Turkey, near Ankara, the Via Sebeste remains astonishingly intact. Archaeologists walking its surface report the same sensation, that of stepping across time. The air is quiet, and the stones are cold beneath the sun. Each one bears the faint imprint of tools, the careful chisel marks of the builders. 2,000 years ago, soldiers might have stood in that same place, setting the stones by hand, unaware that their work would outlive empires and faiths. Even in the Alps, where nature reclaims everything, fragments of Roman roads persist. Hidden beneath moss and snow, their stones still hold the memory of those who crossed them. The Romans built switchbacks and retaining walls to climb impossible slopes, their roads clinging to cliff sides like ribbons of defiance. Centuries later, medieval travelers reused those same routes, often believing them to be miracles left by divine hands. All across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, the Roman road network remains the most tangible proof that the empire's vision was not confined to marble or myth but carved directly into the bones of the earth. Each road was both a promise and a command, to move forward, to connect, to endure. In the quiet farmlands of southern France, where vineyards roll in soft waves under the Mediterranean sun, there are places where the plow still strikes against something unyielding. Beneath a thin layer of soil lies a ribbon of limestone blocks, the bones of the Via Domitia. Farmers sometimes pause, brush away the dirt, and find the same stones that once echoed beneath the sandals of legionaries. Each time the road reveals itself, it feels less like an archaeological discovery and more like a memory rising from the earth. The Via Domitia was the first Roman road built in Gaul. It carried soldiers, settlers, and merchants from Italy across the Alps into the province of Narbonensis. Along its route, milestones marked every Roman mile, about 1,480 meters, and the names of consuls and emperors carved deep into their surfaces told travelers which era had shaped the road they trod. To walk it today is to pass through time itself. In places like Ambrusum and Narbonne, sections of the original paving still lie exposed, their stones smoothed by the passing of centuries. When you step upon them, your foot falls exactly where a Romans did more than 2,000 years ago. In Italy, the heart of the empire, roads radiated outward from the Miliarium Aureum, the golden milestone, erected by Augustus in the Roman Forum. This marker was not merely symbolic. It was the empire's spiritual and administrative center, from which all distances in the Roman world were measured. Every province was connected to Rome by road, and every road, no matter how remote, pointed homeward. That sense of centrality gave the empire its coherence. Even the farthest outpost knew, through the milestones, how far it lay from the capital, and thus how near it remained to the idea of Rome. The roads carried news faster than any system before the telegraph. The imperial courier service, the cursus publicus, operated like a living organism. At every mutatio or change station, fresh horses awaited. At each mantio, food and shelter were available for officials. The roads turned communication into power. When rebellion broke out in the provinces, messengers galloped day and night to deliver orders. An edict written in Rome could reach the frontier of the Rhine within days. The emperors will traveled at the speed of hoofbeats. These same routes also shaped the spread of ideas and beliefs. Christianity's early missionaries followed them, carrying their message from city to city. The Acts of the Apostles describes Paul journeying along Roman roads through Asia Minor and Greece, visiting towns that were themselves products of Roman colonization. The letters he wrote, to the Romans, the Corinthians, the Galatians, traveled the same highways that bore military dispatches. It is no exaggeration to say that without Roman roads, Christianity might never have spread across Europe in the way it did. But with all their grandeur, the roads were not built for eternity alone. They were built for efficiency. Archaeologists studying cross-sections of ancient roads often remark on their precision. Roman surveyors used simple tools yet achieved astonishing accuracy. With the groma, they could align sightlines over long distances. With the chorobates, they measured level gradients, ensuring perfect drainage. Some roads remain so straight that they seem to ignore the landscape entirely, cutting through hills rather than curving around them. Others take elegant detours, following the contours of valleys or rivers, proving that Roman engineering was not blind rigidity but calculated adaptation. In Gaul and Britannia, Roman roads were often built over pre-existing Celtic tracks. The Romans respected practicality. If a native route worked, they refined it. Yet wherever they passed, they imposed their mark. Paving, milestones, culverts, and the unmistakable Roman straightness. Even centuries later, medieval kings adopted these same roads, calling them strata. From that word we get street, one of the quiet linguistic survivors of Rome. The very language of travel in Europe remains Roman. Some of the most haunting discoveries lie not in Europe's fields but beneath its modern cities. In Florence, archaeologists excavating near the Arno River found layers of ancient paving beneath Renaissance foundations, stones still bearing chisel marks. In Cologne, Roman paving lies directly below the Gothic cathedral. In York, England, the headquarters of the Ninth Legion once stood where modern shops now rise. Beneath the floors, Roman cobbles still lie undisturbed, silent under centuries of footsteps. Perhaps the most remarkable survival, however, lies near the Italian town of Terracina, where the Via Appia clings to the coastal cliffs. There, the ancient engineers cut through solid rock to create a passage barely wide enough for two carts to pass. The marks of their chisels are still visible, precise and parallel, like frozen lines of labor. Standing there, with the sea wind rising and the stones darkened by salt, one feels the immensity of human effort, the determination of a civilization that believed no obstacle was too great to be conquered by order and endurance. Roman engineers understood that their roads would define landscapes long after they were gone. They built bridges so solid that many still stand today. The Pont du Gard in France, though primarily an aqueduct, is also a testament to Roman mastery of stone. Its arches rise with mathematical grace, carrying water as effortlessly as the roads carried people. In Spain, the Alcantara Bridge, spanning the Tagus River, bears an inscription that reads, Pontem perpetui mansurum in secula mundi. I have built a bridge which will last forever in the world. That confidence was not arrogance but conviction, the Roman belief that human ingenuity could defeat decay. As the empire aged, the roads became the veins of trade rather than conquest. Silk from the east, amber from the Baltic, furs from Germania, grain from Egypt, all traveled on Roman stones. Even after the empire fractured, these routes remained vital. The Goths, Lombards, Byzantines, and Arabs each inherited parts of the same system. The idea of the road as civilization's spine persisted, echoing through medieval pilgrimage routes and Renaissance trade paths. In many regions, the Roman alignment still dictates the rhythm of life. In France, towns like Nîmes, Arles, and Béziers align perfectly along the Via Domitia. In Britain, market towns cluster where Roman intersections once stood. In Italy, entire suburbs trace the lines of ancient Vie Consulars. To the modern traveler, these patterns feel organic, but they are the ghostwork of empire, invisible yet unbroken. Even nature has learned to live with Rome's legacy. Trees grow along the buried roads, their roots following the old ditches where moisture gathers. In aerial photographs, Roman routes sometimes appear as faint green lines cutting across farmland, the vegetation richer above the ancient stones. It is as if the earth itself remembers the old order and still honors it. And so, beneath every modern highway, every cobblestone street, every gravel path that runs too straight to be coincidence, there may lie a road, silent, ancient, and enduring, whispering the same truth across 20 centuries, that the world we walk has already been walked before. In the centuries following Rome's fall, many of its roads vanished beneath forest, field, and forgotten memory. Yet the skeleton remained. The routes that once carried legions now bore pilgrims and merchants. The Via Francigena, for instance, began as an ancient Roman road linking Canterbury to Rome through France and the Alps. In the Middle Ages, it became one of Christendom's most sacred pilgrim paths. Travelers walked it not with swords but with staffs, their sandals treading the same stones that once felt the iron of Roman sandals. The road had changed its faith, but not its purpose, to connect. In Britain, monks and traders used the old Watling Street and Ermine Street, their Latin names long forgotten but their paths unmistakable. Even as weeds crept over the paving, the routes themselves refused to die. Villages sprouted along the ancient intersections, and inns were built where once the Romans had mansions. The ghost of Roman order shaped medieval geography. Farmers plowed around the roads because they were too hard for the blade, and soon, those raised ridges became landmarks. Devil's Causeways. They were called, not because they were evil, but because no one could imagine mere mortals having built them. Everywhere across Europe, legend replaced memory. Roads became haunted corridors in folklore. In France, peasants said the Roman paths were laid by giants. In Germany, travelers whispered that spirits guarded the stones. In Britain, they spoke of phantom armies marching by night. The supernatural imagination filled the silence left by history, because the scale of Roman work demanded explanation. What no longer seemed human was declared divine or infernal. The empire's engineering became myth. But beneath the myths, the physical evidence endured. In some places, the old roads simply merged with the modern world. The Via Appia Antica outside Rome today is still used by cars, cyclists, and tourists. Cypress trees now line the route, shading tombs and catacombs that once flanked the ancient way. The stones are uneven, their ruts deep from centuries of wheels. Step into one of those ruts and your foot fits perfectly. It's an unbroken line of contact, a living handshake between past and present. Roman roads were not uniform. Each reflected local conditions. In North Africa, engineers used basalt and limestone, blending them with sand for durability under the desert sun. In the Alps, they carved winding switchbacks to manage steep grades. Across the Rhine frontier, in the muddy lands of Germania, roads rested on layers of timber and gravel to resist waterlogging. These differences reveal an empire that understood geography intimately. Every province, every terrain, received its tailored solution. The uniformity of the system lay not in material but in method, the discipline of measurement, the insistence on permanence. At times, the roads also became lines of vulnerability. During invasions, barbarians used them to penetrate deeper into the empire's heart. The very precision that had once empowered Rome turned against it. When the Goths and Vandals advanced, they followed the same routes as the legions. Yet even in collapse, the empire could not unmake its own infrastructure. The roads endured because they were too useful to destroy. New rulers inherited them like the bones of a vanished god. Archaeologists today trace these lines through technology Rome never dreamed of. LiDAR scans reveal lost roads hidden beneath forests in Britain and the Balkans. Infrared imaging from satellites shows faint linear marks that align perfectly with known Roman sites. In Spain, entire networks have been rediscovered this way, invisible to the eye but still inscribed in the soil. Beneath highways and vineyards, Roman engineering waits, intact, patient, indifferent to the centuries above it. In the Italian countryside near Benevento, workers repairing a modern road uncovered a perfect stretch of Roman paving. Large polygonal stones fitted so tightly that a knife blade could not pass between them. The road was buried under 2 meters of earth, yet when exposed, it looked new. Water drained flawlessly. Grass had not pierced the seams. For a brief moment, time reversed. The workers stood silent, realizing they were standing where an engineer from 2 millennia ago had stood, measuring, cutting, laying, believing his work would last forever. And it had. The materials themselves reveal a kind of genius. Roman concrete, known as opus cementitium, was made from volcanic ash, lime, and seawater. Its chemistry allowed it to grow stronger with age. In coastal areas, the reaction between salt and volcanic minerals created crystalline structures that sealed cracks over time. The same science that made Roman harbors immortal also protected the roads from erosion. Modern engineers study this formula, still trying to understand why it resists decay better than contemporary concrete. Rome's roads, in a sense, are still teaching us. One of the most intriguing aspects of Roman roadwork was its ritual side. Construction often began with ceremonies. The surveyor would mark the central line, the decumanus, with sacred care, aligning it to celestial points or the direction of sunrise. Offerings were sometimes buried under the first stone. Coins, fragments of pottery, or small sacrifices to the gods of the journey. These gestures bound religion and engineering together. The road was both a technical and spiritual act, a bridge between the human and the divine order. Every traveler on those roads, from emperor to peasant, felt that same duality. To walk the Via Appia, the Queen of Roads, was to move not only through space but through civilization's bloodstream. Traders carried amphorae of oil, slaves in chains trudged under guards' eyes, poets dreamed of fame, soldiers marched to war, and lovers whispered farewells. The stones held all their footsteps. And even now, when the modern traveler drives a car down the Appian route, that memory is still there. Silent, invisible, but unbroken. The road network also transformed Rome's economy. Before it, no civilization had integrated so vast a territory. Markets synchronized. Goods could move faster than ever. A merchant in Spain could send olive oil to Gaul and receive tin from Britain within months. Tax collectors traveled with efficiency. The empire functioned like a single organism, its arteries of stone pulsing with trade, orders, and ambition. This unity became so natural that even after Rome's fall, Europe instinctively rebuilt around the same patterns. Modern nations, in many ways, are still the children of Roman logistics. In cities like London, Paris, and Cologne, the Roman grid still shapes the streets. Look down from the sky and you can trace the ancient skeleton beneath the modern skin. The city is merely the latest mask. Beneath it lies another, older face. That of the empire that once called itself eternal. Every few decades, heavy rains or excavations reveal another piece of that hidden face. A stretch of paving under a railway station. A milestone embedded in a wall. A fragment of inscription naming a forgotten consul. Each discovery is a whisper from the past saying, "We are still here." To study the Roman roads is to realize that they never truly disappeared. They merely adapted. They became highways, railways, data cables, the evolving veins of human connection. The medium changes, but the purpose endures. Movement, order, communication. Rome invented not just roads, but the very concept of a connected world. When we follow these lines across the modern landscape, we are not just tracing geography but tracing memory, a continuity of motion that began over 2,000 years ago. Each modern highway that mirrors a Roman one, each street that curves where the ancients curved, is a quiet acknowledgement of that legacy. The Romans built with an understanding that infrastructure could outlast power. Empires rise and fall, but the road endures. And perhaps they sensed that because they built for eternity, not for the season. Across France, the Via Agrippa system connected Lyon to the farthest corners of Gaul. Established under Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, the trusted general and engineer of Augustus, these roads created a web that allowed the new province to breathe. Lyon, once a Celtic hill fort, became a Roman hub because of those arteries. The stones laid by Agrippa's surveyors are still buried beneath the streets of modern Lyon. In certain sections, they have resurfaced during construction, each time startling workers who realize that the ground underfoot has been organized for millennia. Similarly, in Spain, the Via de la Plata, the Silver Way, still bears that ancient imprint. It once linked the mining regions of the north with the port cities of the south, carrying not just silver but culture. Roman milestones, miliaria, dot the countryside, some still standing, their Latin inscriptions weathered but legible. Travelers along the Camino de Santiago today often walk segments of this ancient highway without realizing that their pilgrim path was once a Roman commercial route. In Germany, traces of the Limestrasse, the frontier road that ran parallel to the empire's defensive walls, still guide archaeologists. From the Rhine to the Danube, it connected forts, watchtowers, and supply depots. Though the forests have reclaimed much of it, aerial photography in winter reveals faint, straight scars cutting through the snow, the geometry of empire etched on nature. The precision is haunting, a signature that refuses to fade. Italy, of course, remains the heart of this story. The Via Appia, Via Aurelia, Via Flaminia, each a name still spoken, each a line still traveled. Outside Rome, near Aricia, one can walk a section of basalt paving so polished by centuries of footsteps that it reflects light like water. To stand there is to feel both presence and absence, the ghosts of chariots and merchants whispering beneath the soles of your shoes. In the quiet between passing cars, the sound of ancient wheels seems to return. It is strange how roads remember motion. Even when empty, they carry the idea of travel. They are the most human of constructions because they imply movement, choice, purpose. The Romans understood this deeply. Their roads were not simply to transport goods or soldiers. They were to manifest unity. To the Roman mind, a road was civilization extended, a visible line of control and connection. To pave the earth was to tame it. In Britannia, the farthest and perhaps most challenging province, the Romans faced fierce weather and stubborn terrain. The Fossway cut across the island from Exeter to Lincoln, one of the most perfectly straight Roman roads ever built. Its alignment was so exact that modern engineers have measured its deviation over 200 miles to be less than 1/10 of 1 degree. Even today, segments of modern roads follow it precisely. Motorists unknowingly drive the same line the legions once marched. The persistence of that geometry is almost spiritual, the human will made visible in stone. Excavations near Leicester revealed a stretch of the Fossway lying 6 feet below modern ground level. The road was built with a camber, a gentle curve to allow rain to drain off, and bordered by ditches. Beneath it, archaeologists found traces of wooden posts, perhaps used for a temporary bridge or fortification. Layers of ash and charcoal hinted at ancient repairs. The road had been maintained for centuries before finally being buried. That layering of use, neglect, and rediscovery is a microcosm of Europe itself. The Roman mile, 1,480 meters, defined the distance between milestones, and these markers carried more than numbers. They bore the names of emperors, the date of construction, and sometimes the distance to Rome itself. To walk along a Roman road was to move through a map that constantly reminded you of your relationship to the empire. Even in the most remote provinces, the stones spoke of Rome. The milestones were both wayfinders and monuments, propaganda in marble. In the early 20th century, during railway construction in France and Britain, engineers were astonished to find that the old Roman foundations provided ideal routes for new tracks. The Romans had already chosen the optimal gradients and alignments. What was good for chariots proved equally good for steam locomotives. The logic of the Roman surveyor endured into the industrial age. It was as though the ancient planners had anticipated future generations who would build upon their work. Roman engineering manuals, such as those by Vitruvius, emphasized proportion and balance, qualities that shaped not only roads but the Roman worldview. The straightness was not merely practical but philosophical. A straight road represented order imposed upon chaos. It was geometry as ideology. Even when mountains forced detours, the Romans sought the most direct possible path, cutting through rock with hand tools, bridging valleys with arches. The road became a metaphor for the empire itself, unyielding, rational, forward-moving. Yet the roads also served another, quieter function. They preserved the names of forgotten places. Along these routes were mutations and mansions, posting stations where travelers could rest, change horses, or find food. Many of those sites became villages, and their names evolved into modern towns. The continuity of settlement mirrors the continuity of the roads. To follow a Roman road across Europe is to move through time as much as space. The landscape becomes a palimpsest, each generation writing its story over the last. During the Napoleonic Wars, French engineers studying Roman roads realized that their efficiency was unmatched. Napoleon himself admired their permanence. He ordered his road builders to study the Roman examples, and the result was a revival of that ancient discipline. The Route Nationale system, the backbone of modern France, owes much to Agrippa's blueprints. Across Europe, the legacy persisted not as nostalgia but as practicality. The Romans had simply found the best way to move across the continent, and no one improved upon it. There is a certain irony in this. The empire that once imposed its will through roads eventually disappeared, but the roads themselves became Europe's inheritance. Even nations that once resisted Rome now walk upon its foundations. The conqueror's tool became the continent's common thread. Beneath the politics of centuries, beneath the languages and wars, the roads quietly continued their work, carrying travelers, ideas, faiths, and goods from one age to the next. And sometimes, on rare nights when fog gathers low on the Appian Way, locals claim to see faint figures marching in the mist, the outline of shields, the glint of bronze, the rhythmic echo of unseen footsteps. It is perhaps imagination, or perhaps memory embedded so deep in the stones that it replays itself like a dream. The roads do not forget. As the centuries unfolded, Rome's roads became the skeleton of medieval Europe's rebirth. The network that once served legions and merchants now guided monks, crusaders, and kings. When Charlemagne dreamed of uniting the fractured lands of the West, his messengers traveled along Roman routes. When pilgrims set out from Canterbury or Santiago, they followed the ghostly lines of the Vie Publici. Without the Roman roads, the Middle Ages might have remained a series of isolated valleys and walled cities. Instead, they became a continent of movement once more. Yet few travelers of that era understood the origin of the paths beneath their feet. The stones were old, and the language of their builders was long forgotten. A peasant might point to a road and call it the Devil's Way, believing that no mortal hands could have laid such hard and perfect stone. The logic of empire had turned to legend. Still the lines endured. A Roman road, once made, rarely disappeared. It simply became absorbed into the rhythm of the land. Archaeologists call this persistent topography, the tendency of human routes to remain stable over millennia. Paths carved by necessity outlast dynasties. Where the Romans built, others inevitably followed. In Britain, the Waddling Street evolved into the A2 and A5 highways. In Italy, the Via Flaminia became the SS3. Even the European motorway system, seen from space, reveals faint echoes of the Roman design, the geometry of antiquity haunting the age of asphalt. There is a certain stillness in this endurance. The Roman road does not ask to be remembered. It simply remains. In the French countryside, an old farmer's field may conceal beneath its wheat an ancient route, perfectly preserved. When plows strike the hard layer of stone, they stop abruptly, as if hitting time itself. In aerial surveys, long lines of dryness appear across green fields. These are the ghost roads, invisible on the ground but visible from the air, like old scars on the skin of Europe. The mystery deepens when one considers how these roads were constructed so uniformly across such a vast empire. From Scotland to Syria, the method was the same. A central trench filled with layers of rubble, gravel, and stone, drainage ditches along both sides, milestones to mark the distances. The Grammatici, Rome's land surveyors, carried their instruments, the groma, the dioptra, aligning the roads with astronomical precision. They worked under the open sky, measuring with cords and sighting rods, translating landscape into geometry. Theirs was not only a science but an art, a discipline of patience and foresight. Some of the best preserved examples lie in the Balkans. Along the route between Niš and Sofia, once the Via Militaris, the road runs almost unchanged. When modern engineers rebuilt the highway, they found beneath the soil the Roman original, so straight and so stable that they reused its alignment entirely. The ancient foundation, after nearly 2,000 years, still bore the weight of modern traffic. It is said that when the machines rolled over it, the vibration awakened a hollow echo, as if the road remembered its past life. In North Africa, Roman roads have fared even better. The dry climate preserved them almost perfectly. In Tunisia, near Spitla, the paving stones of a Roman highway stretch for miles, untouched. Camels now walk where chariots once thundered. The desert winds sweep the dust away, revealing patterns of stone that shimmer under the sun. The inscriptions on nearby milestones still read the names of emperors: Antoninus, Hadrian, Septimius Severus, each a timestamp in the long life of the road. To imagine these roads in their prime is to imagine motion on a scale Europe would not see again until the modern age. Caravans of merchants, military convoys, imperial couriers, all moving under the same law, protected by the same idea of Pax Romana. At every junction stood a milestone declaring distance to Rome, as if reminding travelers that no matter how far they went, they were still within the empire's reach. The stone, the language, the order, everything pointed toward the center. Even after the empire fractured, this sense of unity lingered. Medieval maps still used Roman routes as guides. When the Renaissance revived classical learning, scholars traced those ancient lines again, marveling at how much of Europe's structure had been inherited. The rediscovery of the Itinerarium Antonini, a Roman road map, astonished 16th-century historians. They realized that the empire had not merely built roads. It had created the concept of a mapped world. The roads were not just physical but intellectual, the grid through which the Romans understood their dominion. There are moments in modern archaeology when that understanding comes alive again. In the south of England, near Chichester, workers widening a motorway unearthed a section of Roman road more than 2 meters below ground. The paving stones were flawless, the drainage channels intact. Buried for centuries, it emerged into the sunlight as if waiting to resume its purpose. The engineers paused their work, walking quietly along the exposed line. They said it felt like stepping into another time. The air itself seemed older there. The endurance of Roman roads raises questions not only about engineering but about vision. Why did they build so permanently? The answer lies partly in Roman psychology. The belief in posterity, in empire as eternity. A road was not just for function, it was for legacy. Each mile marked the triumph of order over wilderness. To pave a road was to claim a future. That belief resonates even now. Modern nations still name their highways after emperors, conquerors, or ideals, echoes of the Roman impulse to inscribe purpose upon the land. The stones, however, have a quieter wisdom. They remind us that power fades, but connection endures. Where Rome's banners have vanished, the paths remain. Farmers still walk them. Children still play upon their edges. And sometimes in the golden light of evening, a traveler may look down a long straight stretch of road cutting through the countryside and feel something ancient stir within. A recognition that this, too, is part of an inheritance older than memory. The roads do not belong to Rome anymore. They belong to the world that grew upon them. To walk upon one is to walk through every age that has passed since it was laid. Beneath the modern hum of engines lies the whisper of iron-shod hooves, the grind of wheels, the murmur of Latin commands. The layers of sound overlap, ancient and modern coexisting, separated only by time's thin veil. Every few years, another forgotten road emerges from the earth. Each discovery a reminder that Europe's foundation is quite literally Roman. Beneath Paris and London, beneath fields and forests, beneath airports and railways, the old stones wait, still aligned, still connected, still fulfilling their purpose. To lead somewhere, to bring lives together. The empire may be gone, but its geometry remains. The rediscovery of these ancient lines has become one of archaeology's most patient obsessions. Across Europe, surveyors with drones, satellites, and ground-penetrating radar trace patterns invisible to the naked eye. Each faint linear scar in the soil, each buried ridge, can lead to the rediscovery of a Roman highway. In the rolling landscapes of Britain, they appear as ghostly shadows across plowed fields. In Italy they cut through vineyards. In Germany, they hide beneath cobblestone streets that have followed their alignment for centuries. What astonishes researchers most is the precision. Roads separated by thousands of miles align with mathematical consistency. The Via Egnatia, stretching from the Adriatic to Byzantium, runs as true today as it did 2 millennia ago. The Via Domitia, the first Roman road in Gaul, can still be walked from Nîmes to the Spanish border. In southern France, its stones lie beneath modern Route Nationale 9. When engineers mapped the area, they found that the Roman measurements deviated less than a few meters from today's modern routes. The ancients had already chosen the most efficient line. Such endurance gives the sense that the roads are alive, that they have adapted to time rather than resisted it. Modern civilization has merely layered itself upon them. In some cities like Cologne or Verona, you can stand in a bustling square and know that directly beneath you lies the Roman Decumanus Maximus, the central east-west road. Beneath the shops and traffic lights, beneath centuries of rebuilding, the same axis persists. There's something deeply human in that persistence. Roads reflect the continuity of purpose. Movement, exchange, connection. They are not monuments, static and grand, but living arteries of civilization. To study them is to study what it means to be human. The urge to reach one another, to cross distances, to turn isolation into community. In the quiet fields of northern Italy, archaeologists once unearthed a section of road perfectly preserved under clay. When they removed the soil, they found not only the paving but also wheel ruts etched deep into the stone, grooves worn by carts long vanished. The ruts measured about 4 feet 8 inches apart, almost exactly the width of modern railway tracks. Coincidence, perhaps, but also continuity. The dimensions of movement, once defined by Roman engineers, still shape our machines today. In Britain, the remains of the Stane Street connecting London to Chichester cut through modern suburbia. Motorways follow its path. Fences and hedgerows trace its old embankments. Aerial photographs reveal the perfect geometry hiding beneath cul-de-sacs and housing estates. It's a strange kind of coexistence. The living and the ancient sharing the same space without ever meeting. Beneath a supermarket car park or a garden wall, a Roman line sleeps undisturbed. Each excavation tells a story not just of engineering but of people. Near Pompeii, under the hardened ash of Vesuvius, a section of Via Nucerina was discovered. The paving stones bore the imprints of hooves, wheels, even children's sandals. One could almost see the bustle that had passed there. Carts creaking, animals neighing, vendors shouting. The eruption had frozen not just a city but a moment in traffic. 2,000 years later, those marks remain, preserved like fingerprints of daily life. The endurance of these roads also reveals something subtle about Roman governance. The empire's strength was not built on walls alone but on movement, the ability to send news, troops, and trade swiftly across vast distances. The cursus publicus, the imperial postal system, relied on these roads. Couriers on horseback carried messages sealed with the emperor's authority. At each mutatio or relay station, fresh horses awaited, and within days, information could travel from the Rhine to the Tiber. This efficiency was revolutionary. The roads were not merely infrastructure. They were the nervous system of an empire. As centuries passed, even when that nervous system decayed, the bones remained. Medieval kings taxed travelers on the same routes. Renaissance artists journeyed along them toward Rome. Napoleon's armies marched their cannon wheels over them, retracing Caesar's steps unknowingly. And now, tourists walk with cameras where once centurions marched in armor. The rhythm is slower, the sound softer, but the path is the same. In the city of Trier, Germany, once Augusta Treverorum, a section of Roman road still lies open to the air. You can walk its uneven stones, feeling the rise and fall of each slab underfoot. The surface is worn smooth, edges rounded by countless feet. When the sun hits at a low angle, the shadows of the ruts stretch long and dark, like veins across stone. The sensation is almost intimate, as though the road itself breathes faintly, remembering all who have crossed it. Not all Roman roads were majestic highways. Some were modest rural lanes connecting villas, quarries, or small forts. Yet even the smallest followed the same principle: durability, order, direction. That uniform discipline made the system so resilient. It was not dependent on greatness, but on consistency. Every road, from the Grand Appian to a forgotten track in Gaul, was part of the same idea. That civilization depends on connection. In the heart of Rome, under the Piazza Venezia, construction for the Metro Line C revealed a perfectly preserved Roman street 12 feet below the surface. The archaeologists found ruts, drains, and even coins lost by travelers. It was as if a slice of the first century had been sealed and kept for the 21st. The city, like a living palimpsest, had grown upon its own bones. Rome moves above Rome forever. There is a quiet poetry in how modern technology rediscovers what ancient hands made. The laser scans and satellite images are simply new forms of sight, tools to reveal an old truth, that the shape of the world beneath us has barely changed. Beneath every modern highway lies the echo of an older one, and beneath that, the dream of a road that leads somewhere farther still. To walk along a Roman road today is to step out of time. The hum of traffic fades, replaced by the faint rhythm of footsteps that once echoed in Latin cadence. The stones are cold, but their presence is warm. Each one holds the imprint of purpose, the human will to move, to build, to leave something that endures. You can feel it under your soles, as though the centuries have compressed into the weight of the stone itself. Sometimes, in remote parts of Europe, the road ends abruptly, swallowed by forest, cut by rivers, buried under centuries of soil. Yet if you stand there in the stillness, you can almost sense where it continues. The line remains in your mind, stretching onward toward an unseen horizon. That is the true power of the Roman road. Not just where it leads, but that it makes you believe it leads somewhere, always forward. In the highlands of Spain, archaeologists working near Leon unearthed a forgotten stretch of the Via de la Plata. The stones lay buried under centuries of silt, untouched by human hands since the empire's fall. When the dust was brushed away, the road emerged perfectly aligned, its edges bordered by drainage ditches, its surface polished smooth by 1,000 journeys long vanished. The scene was silent except for the wind, but in that silence, it was easy to imagine the sound of legionnaires' armor clinking, the creak of wagons, and the laughter of traders moving south toward Merida. Every footprint had faded, but the direction remained. The Romans measured their world not in years but in miles. Every road began at the Miliarium Aureum, the golden milestone in the Forum of Rome, from which all distances across the empire were counted. It was both literal and symbolic. Rome was the center, the heart from which all roads flowed like veins from a beating chest. Even now, many European routes still follow the same logic, spiraling outward from ancient capitals, invisible geometries of empire still shaping modern geography. When we speak of the empire's fall, we often imagine collapse, decay, destruction. Yet in truth it was transformation. The political power crumbled, but the roads endured, repurposed and reimagined. In early medieval maps, the Roman highways became Iter Britanniarum or Cemens Roma, their names changing but their direction constant. Pilgrims to Santiago de Compostela unknowingly followed ancient military roads. Crusaders marching east walked the same routes that once carried Roman merchants. The empire dissolved, but its network remained, a skeleton upon which Europe rebuilt itself. Historians often remark that the Romans never intended their roads to last forever. They were practical, not romantic. Yet their practicality, precise measurements, durable materials, and consistent standards, created something that outlived its purpose. The stones do not care who walks them, only that someone does. And in that endurance, the roads have become more than infrastructure. They are memory made solid. In Britain, when engineers dug foundations for a housing estate near Gloucester, they struck a layer of compact gravel. Beneath it lay a Roman road in perfect preservation. The local authorities decided to leave it untouched, sealing it beneath protective material and building over it. "It will wait for future generations," one archaeologist said. It's a fitting metaphor. The roads continue to sleep beneath us, timeless witnesses awaiting rediscovery. From aerial views, the pattern of Roman roads forms a network so vast that it almost resembles circuitry. Thin, straight lines intersecting across the European continent, a map not of politics but of connection. These were not just roads for armies. They were pathways of culture. Latin spread along them as did architecture, law, and language. Along these same roads came Christianity, art, philosophy, and trade. The Roman roads were arteries of civilization, carrying not just goods but ideas. Beneath the vineyards of Provence, a section of the Via Aurelia lies hidden. Farmers tell stories of their tractors hitting ancient stones when plowing. Each time they uncover a fragment, they pause, dust it off and move on. The road beneath the vines continues its quiet existence, merging with the rhythm of modern life. The grapes that now grow there are nourished by soil once trodden by Roman sandals. The land remembers. Even nature itself has adapted to these hidden structures. In some places, vegetation grows differently along the buried roads. Archaeologists have learned to trace them by color variations visible in aerial photographs. Lighter strips of grass reveal where ancient gravel lies beneath. Thus, the earth still bears the faint imprint of Roman geometry. The landscape is a living archive. The Romans were not the first to build roads, but they made them instruments of empire. Each road was surveyed by agrimensors, engineers who used tools like the groma and chorobates to maintain perfect straightness. They cut through forests, bridged rivers, and leveled mountainsides. Their motto was simple: directness above all. The road was not to yield to nature. Nature was to yield to the road. That defiance of terrain became the mark of Roman will, the assertion that civilization could impose order upon chaos. And yet, centuries later, those same roads have softened. Moss covers the stones, wildflowers sprout between the cracks, roots pry them apart. Nature reclaims without malice. The lines remain, but they breathe differently now, less as instruments of conquest and more as relics of endurance. Where once soldiers marched, now shepherds walk. Where once chariots rolled, now bicycles hum. The purpose has changed, but the presence endures. In the Balkans, the Via Militaris once connected Singidunum, modern Belgrade, to Constantinople. Today, the modern E80 highway follows the same corridor. Trucks and cars trace the same path once taken by legions. The names have changed, the technology transformed, but the human impulse is identical: to move, to connect, to reach beyond the horizon. Beneath the asphalt lies the original Roman paving, and beneath that, the idea of civilization itself. In 2021, near Verona, excavators widening a road for modern traffic uncovered a perfectly preserved Roman pavement 3 meters below ground. The stones glistened as they emerged from the earth, as if waiting for light. Local newspapers called it La Strada Immortale, the immortal road. The phrase captured something profound, a sense that the Romans, through sheer human effort, had written permanence into the landscape. Each rediscovery adds to a larger mosaic, a picture of continuity stretching across centuries. The roads are not isolated relics but part of an unbroken narrative. When archaeologists map them, they also map time itself. Every line traced in soil connects past to present, reminding us that history does not disappear. It merely hides until we look closely enough. In remote corners of Europe, you can still walk sections of these ancient roads untouched by modern reconstruction. In the Scottish Highlands, the Deer Street runs through misty valleys, its paving stones slick with dew. In Spain, near Caceres, the Via de la Plata rises through hills where the scent of rosemary fills the air. In southern France, the Via de Misha glows pale under the sun, its ruts filled with rainwater reflecting the sky. Each of these paths feels alive, humming with the resonance of footsteps long gone. There is a theory among historians that roads are the truest markers of empire. Not coins, not statues, not borders. Empires rise and fall, but the lines they draw across the earth remain. The Roman roads prove that idea. They are silent empires beneath our feet, reminders that civilization's greatest achievements are not the wars it wins but the connections it builds. The poet Statius once wrote, "The world itself wears the Roman way." Centuries later it still does. Every highway, every railway, every digital map owes something to the logic first set by Roman surveyors. The world has changed, but its foundations have not. In a quiet valley outside Rome, far from the modern hum of cars and lights, a small fragment of the Via Appia Antica still breathes. The stones are uneven, worn into gentle hollows by 2,000 years of footsteps. Grass pushes through the cracks, Olive trees bend over the edges, and the air hums with cicadas. When you stand there alone at dusk, the city's noise fades to a distant memory. You can almost hear the faint rhythm of hooves, the murmur of Latin voices carried by the wind. It is as if time folds in on itself, and the ghosts of travelers pass by unseen, continuing their journeys to destinations long erased from maps. This place is not a museum. It is a threshold. Beneath every modern road, every cobblestone street in Europe, the Roman pattern still lies waiting, a grid that defines how we move, how we build, how we think about space and distance. Historians sometimes call it the Invisible Empire, because even when Rome fell, its infrastructure never truly vanished. The roads became the skeleton of medieval kingdoms, the blueprint of Renaissance trade, and the seed of our modern world. Beneath Paris, London, Florence, and Barcelona, the Roman lines remain like old veins beneath new skin. Archaeologists say the Romans did not build roads for eternity. They built them for efficiency. Yet somehow their precision created eternity anyway. A road that began as a tool of empire has become a monument to endurance. Its builders are dust now, but the path remains. That paradox, impermanence creating permanence, is what makes these roads so haunting. They are more than artifacts. They are the earth remembering what humanity once dared to do. In some places, the modern traveler walks unknowingly on top of them. The A1 motorway in Britain follows the route of Ermine Street, the ancient road linking London to York. The Italian SS7 traces the Via Appia. The French N7 mirrors the Via Agrippa. Even digital navigation apps plotting efficient routes across Europe still echo those same straight lines. We are guided by algorithms, but the algorithm is Roman. The empire continues to shape our movement, silently, invisibly. There is a peculiar intimacy in knowing that under the tires of a car speeding across Germany lies the old Via Claudia Augusta, built to carry Roman legions northward through the Alps. Beneath the noise of engines, there is silence. Beneath the concrete ancient stone, the layers of time rest one upon another like pages in a closed book. Each layer whispers to the next. We have been here before. The Roman engineers who built these roads could not have imagined satellites, skyscrapers, or the electric pulse of modern Europe. Yet they understood something timeless. That connection defined civilization. Their roads were acts of faith in the idea that people should never remain isolated, that the world should be bridged, not divided. Every mile paved was a declaration that distance could be conquered, that the known world could be united by effort and will. When archaeologists excavate these roads, they often find offerings buried beneath the first layer. Coins, amulets, fragments of pottery. These were gifts to the gods of travel, prayers for safety and success. The Romans believed that the journey itself was sacred. 2,000 years later, we still understand that feeling. Every path we take, every road we follow, carries that same quiet hope, that we will reach somewhere better, or at least discover something of ourselves along the way. Sometimes, after a heavy rain, the outlines of a Roman road appear faintly beneath the fields, lines of pale gravel shining through the soil, like bones revealed for a moment before vanishing again. The farmers who see them rarely disturb them. They say the land breathes easier when left untouched. The old world sleeps beneath the new, undisturbed, still keeping its secrets. It is strange to think that all of Europe once pulsed with life along these arteries. Soldiers, poets, merchants, slaves, all bound together by the same endless dust. The roads were the great equalizer. Status mattered less on the journey than the endurance to finish it. Along the Via Egnatia, across the Balkans, Greek traders and Roman centurions shared the same taverns, drank from the same wells, slept beneath the same stars. The road cared for none of their titles. It belonged to movement itself. As empires rose and fell, the stones stayed. The Byzantine Empire repaired them. The Franks and Lombards used them. Medieval pilgrims wore them smooth again. Napoleon marched his armies along them, tracing Rome's ghost through Europe. Even now, every journey across the continent, by car, by train, by foot, follows in some quiet way the ancient Roman rhythm of distance and direction. There is one moment that every traveler who walks these old roads knows well. That feeling when the path ahead narrows into silence, and the past feels close enough to touch. The light grows soft, the air stills, and the imagination fills with invisible footsteps. The present becomes porous. The line between now and then dissolves. You are no longer walking through history. History is walking through you. Somewhere beneath a cafe in Lyon, beneath a subway tunnel in London, beneath a quiet vineyard in Tuscany, the old stones rest. They are unseen but undefeated. They have survived empires, wars, revolutions, and centuries of forgetfulness. Their survival is not loud. It is steady like a pulse that never stops. The story of the Roman roads is not about ruin or nostalgia. It is about endurance, the kind that hums beneath the surface of every civilization, holding it together even when everything else falls apart. To walk upon one is to walk within the idea of connection itself, the understanding that all paths, no matter how distant, eventually lead back to each other. So if one evening you find yourself standing on a lonely path in the countryside, where the stones are ancient and the horizon glows gold, remember that beneath your feet runs a road older than your language, older than your city, older than your nation. You are walking upon the memory of the world. And now, as this journey ends, imagine those hidden lines stretching still, under streets, rivers, mountains, and cities, silent but alive. They do not end where the map stops. They continue beneath the earth, beneath our lives, beneath everything we think is new. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the long, straight road vanishing into dusk, the faint echo of footsteps fading somewhere ahead. Feel the weight of history beneath your soles, the warmth of stone that once bore the world's passage. Take a slow breath. The empire is gone, but the road remains, waiting for you to walk it again, when the world grows quiet and the past whispers through the ground beneath your feet.